Welcome to episode 187 of the Startup Show. Today, I have, for the very first time, a biotech company here on the show together with Christian Schaub, who is the CEO and co-founder of Redbiotec. I'm very excited to talk to him about all the important things you need to know as an investor in biotech companies. We talk about Redbiotec and what they're trying to cure and work with bacteria, but we also talk about why it's so important to be risk-seeking and opportunistic. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the video. Welcome to episode 187 of the Startup Show. Today I'm very excited to talk to Christian Schaub, who is the CEO and co-founder of Redbiotec. Christian, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you. For me, that's a premiere that I host a biotech startup. So we had to do a lot of research. I had to do a lot of reading and homework to really understand what the case is. And we contacted a lot of experts to really understand the case and so I can get to ask the right questions. Nevertheless, as we have a tradition on the show, the first minute and a half is dedicated for you to introduce yourself so my audience and all the investors out there get an understanding of who you are. And I'm very excited to hear, so please take it away.
Thank you very much, Cedric, for having me here. I'm pleased to introduce myself. My name is Christian Schaub. I'm CEO and co-founder of Redbiotec. I'm married. I have two wonderful girls. I actively invest as an investor and a business angel in young companies, in startup companies. That is an engagement beyond my own company, beyond Redbiotec. I've also been trainer and coach of several, even multiple startup companies for more than 20 years now for various programs such as Venturelab and InnoSwiss.
When you look at your LinkedIn profile, all of the 15 years, I think, so you've been in the startup ecosystem for probably one of the longest times before it was, let's say, cool to be part of the ecosystem. So I'm very, very excited. You also have a very diverse angle. You have as well as the entrepreneurial angle, but also the investor side. So I'm very excited. But let's first talk about your background. I mean, as far as I understood, you studied electrical engineering and then you moved into biotech. Maybe you can quickly elaborate how this transition happened.
Yeah, that's correct. I did my master here at ETH Zürich in engineering. Shortly after my study at ETH, I started, I would say, a classic career as a consultant. I did some projects for international corporations, including banks, industrial companies in engineering and consulting. And I did that for 3 years as a project leader. And it just happens that if you're a consultant, you could get bored after some time because you constantly give advices to companies, which is nice. But you're never really involved in the business. You feel somehow excluded from the core business of these companies. So after 3 years of doing consulting, I moved on and I joined as a young businessman a startup company, also in the IT space. And I learned anything from how to start a company, to challenges you face, to make it grow, until I, after a couple of years, felt, well, it's now time to move on myself and to start my own companies. And I did that, so I started my own business, and very quickly after that, I got in touch with Beat Zürich from IFJ. He was right then incorporating this Venturelab initiative, and from first year on, he asked me whether I could be one of his coaches or trainers, and I agreed. I really wanted to share all my learnings with young entrepreneurs. That's why I've been doing now this startup training and coaching for nearly 20 years.
Mm-hmm. I was told that you were one of the pioneers in biotech entrepreneurship here in Switzerland. So maybe you can reflect back when you started your company. I think that was in 2006 when you started. Redbiotec, how was the environment back then here in Switzerland?
It was actually different from today. Today you have a large number of biotech startup companies. When My co-founder Corinne John and myself, when we started our company, we very quickly moved to today's biotech valley in Schlieren. You might know that. So this is next to Roche. This is next to University Hospital Zurich, next to a lot of other biotech companies. And when we moved there, Corinne and myself, they were actually car tires, they're media corporations. They were only very few people working in biotech. Yeah. So that's, if I compare that situation then back in time and with today's situation, it's very different. So today we have, this area in Wagistrasse is dominated actually by life sciences. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were, if you call it that way, we were somehow pioneers. However, we were not the first ones. I mean, I have to admit that Redbiotec was far not the first company in that ecosystem. So before Redbiotec, there was, for instance, Glycard, a successful biotech company, which was sold to Roche, I think in 2005. And even before, also before Redbiotec, there was the company Cytos. They were like the star in the life science sector in Switzerland, and they got very high in valuation, and but then they were running into huge troubles, and actually they had to lay off nearly all the people. Today they're somehow integrated in Kuros.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For me, that's also kind of like the first time that I interview a biotech startup. So maybe just to give a 101 to everybody out there who maybe also does that for the first time, what are kind of like the main criteria investors should look at when they're analyzing a biotech startup?
That's a very good question, and maybe I couldn't answer to the full extent of that question. But I believe it's, and also I try to answer it from my perspective. Yes. If I consider life science investment, so if I consider putting my own money or betting my own money on young startup companies in the biotech sector, what would be the criteria? I believe you have to follow the strategy, obviously, of big pharma companies, because ultimately you have to make money. If you want to make money, you have to start thinking from the exit strategy. And the exit strategy for a biotech company normally is not going public, but a trade sale to a pharma company. So you have to start thinking the way pharma companies do consider investments and ultimately acquisitions of biotech companies. Mm-hmm. So I try to follow the trends, the criteria under which pharma companies do acquire young companies. Mm-hmm. What they're always looking for is obviously new therapies, which are promising, if I say promising, that they could actually be superior to the existing therapies that are available in the therapeutic space, and the same holds probably also true for diagnostics.
Yes. Okay, but again, I think in biotech there's a lot of related to the stages and the market opportunities. Let's say we figure out how to treat a certain cancer. Mm-hmm. How does that look? Let's say more in a content perspective and less the acquisition. Yeah, so
that's just general strategy. What I'm saying is, so I think a technology or any asset, so also or mainly any therapeutic, any compound, any small molecule, any large molecule, any virus, any bacteria, whatever you use for as your therapy, has to be superior than the standard of care. Okay. Obviously, and has to be superior, by the way, also compared to anything that is in the clinical development or anything that is published in the preclinical phase. So when it comes to disease areas, pharma companies are very opportunistic. So of course, most of the pharma companies have a clear scope. Like Roche, the company Roche is highly focused on oncology. Mm-hmm. So they have a strong belief that oncology will be a very good business model even also in the future. That's why they focus also when it comes to their M&A strategy on the acquisition of oncology companies. However, I was just getting back from BioEurope last week in Hamburg, and nearly all pharma companies I was talking to, they confirmed that they're opportunistic. So if they have something very attractive, even a little bit out of their scope, they want to grab it.
Yes. I was told that like in biotech, you ask what you want to accomplish on the long term. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of an overview of Redbiotec, what exactly it is that you're working on, and like maybe in a language that even I understand.
We believe in the potency of bacteria. We believe that bacteria can be very attractive to treat certain diseases. And that goes far beyond what most pharma and biotech companies have developed so far. If you go back in time, you see that traditional pharma business was probably focused on chemical compounds. So people in pharma companies were focused on developing new chemicals to treat various diseases, including cancer, cardiovascular diseases, other diseases. Then they moved from the small molecules to the large molecules. Now, large molecules, what's this? I mean, large molecules, they're not so complex. They are mainly monoclonal antibodies. I wouldn't say shift, but this move into this huge space of developing monoclonal antibodies against various diseases happened in the last century, so in the 20th century. Today, I personally believe, and that's obviously backed by the entire company Redbiotec and Redbiotec's shareholders, that we believe that bacteria are a class of assets that can be tremendously working against various diseases. I'll give you an example. Some bacteria like to accumulate naturally. It's their natural tropism to accumulate in tumors. So if you bring them into patients, they go to the tumors naturally. You don't even have to drive them. At least some of the bacteria do that. So you have a natural weapon against the tumor because bacteria go there. And now, of course, you have to modify those bacteria, and that's what we're doing. You have to engineer them, as we call it. We have to manipulate genetically those bacteria. We have to remove some functions. We have to add other functions to make them potent and safe to treat a specific disease. So we're developing bacteria at Redbiotec. So bacteria, it's not too complex. I think you understand bacteria. And we just make them specifically potent and safe for specific diseases.
And how are you making sure that these bacteria, like you say, like they're going naturally, but like what exactly are you doing to these bacteria that like they are then can solve or like can treat or cure certain tumors?
In our case, I mean, by the way, we're not the only ones. I'm glad to say that. I would be a little bit nervous if Redbiotec was the only company doing bacterial engineering in the biotech space. But when it comes to specific work at Redbiotec, what we do, we take, as the main pillar of Redbiotec, we take our E. coli bacteria and we make them invasive. So we make them invade cells. We bring them to the tumor site. We make them invade a cancer cell. And then they have to release cargo, payload. And this payload has to do something bad to the tumor directly and indirectly recruit T cells, so immune cells, to fight the tumor tissue. That's what we do. So we engineer bacteria in a way, they go to the tumor site, they invade, that's what they have to engineer. They invade, they go in, they self-lyse themselves, so they get destroyed, and they release what they have as a payload with them, and this payload will then have the effect on the tumor.
And where do you stand with the development of this? Like now, would you explain to me, I guess it's the ultimate goal to treat a certain cancer, a tumor, and what have you figured out till today? Like what is actually already possible?
So we could show many things. We could show in vitro and in animal models. We could show that we have two groups of bacteria. They both have the same core, but we make out of this same core two groups that are slightly different from each other. One is to fight cancer, and one is for gene therapy. Now, what is gene therapy? Gene therapy is to bring in human cells, some elements that modify this cell. That could be, so the ultimate goal, obviously, if you have, for instance, a genetic defect of a cell, you bring in tools into a cell which correct this mistake. That happens, unfortunately, many, many times, that you acquire genetic errors or mistakes, and that leads to disease. So you want to bring in something into that cell that corrects it. That's the gene therapy arm, and the other arm is the oncology arm, which is mainly to destroy the cells.
Whenever it's about a treatment or cure, you have to go through a lot of regulatory steps, let's say. In America, it's called the FDA. So where do you stand with the regulatory agencies? Do you have already something in place to kind of like move on to the next phase?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So that's not just for Redbiotec, that's for any biotechnology company. You have to be aware of these steps when it comes to approval. And that's why I highly recommend that you start interacting with the regulators early on. You don't develop something and then very late in the development process you realize that, something will not be accepted or not be approved ultimately by the authorities. So when it comes to the FDA approval or EMA approval here in Europe or Swissmedic in Switzerland, we know what we have to show, which package we have to show, we have to present to the regulator to get the approval to entering the clinical development. So at the moment, Redbiotec is in the phase of validating all its assets in the preclinical stage. And in case we want to do that with our own investors to entering into the clinical development, then we have to present a package to be filed to the authorities to get the approval to enter the clinical development. We know pretty well what we have to present, but we get and we learn a lot from other companies, we learn a lot from advisors, we learn a lot interacting directly with the regulators. We do that. So this is a big part of our work, to be close and to know what we have to present to regulators to get the approvals.
Yes. I mean, what's very interesting is when you compare, let's say, biotech startups again to, let's say, the ones that are more tech-oriented, what I usually deal with, the time scope is very, very different. I mean, usually I would say a regular start, I'm calling it regular because that's what I deal with, is usually dealing with exits between 5 to 10 years. Now we are 13 years, I think, down the road of Redbiotec. What was very interesting for me to see is that at some point you exited partial of the company, still stayed with it. Maybe you can elaborate quickly, like what was the thought process behind that?
Yes. So I think the exit point can be really many, many years down the road.
Yes.
If you move forward your company into the different clinical stages.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily have to do that. I think, and that's one of the strategy of our company, you can already exit your company in a preclinical stage. If you collect enough evidence that your technology, your platform works to develop very attractive therapeutics, and the hints you generate out of your in vitro assays, your animal models, if the conclusions derived from those studies are valid and seen valid from the pharma perspective, then you can basically trade your company in the preclinical phase. That's what we did with our spin-off company. So at that time we were working in the space of novel vaccines. So we developed proteins. We used them as part of formulation against different diseases, and they built our vaccine program at that point. Then we moved the most advanced business, which was a prophylactic vaccine program. We moved that into a spin-off company, and we ultimately were able to sell the spin-off company to a big pharma company in the US. And that was back in 2014. So if you take that into account, you can see the company was founded end of 2006, and the first partial exit of Redbiotec happened in 2014, so that was 8 years. And of course, if you run with one program forward into clinical phase 1 and then 2, that could easily go 14, 15 more years.
And kind of like, what was your motivation to stay and not say like, okay, like I'm just going to go on the other side of the table and become an investor only?
For me, it's very clear that I'm driven by probably two things. One is the patient's needs. So I get up in the morning, work for Redbiotec, because I truly believe that there are patients out there who need our therapies. I want to contribute to that process. I don't want to leave and do something else. So I really want to contribute as long as I can. And I also want to share what I believe is one of the key pillar of my personal life is sharing values in my role as a father. I try to do that also in my role as CEO, that it's important that people can profit from my learnings, from my good experiences and my bad experiences, and they can profit from that and can improve their own work. And as long as I believe that I have something to say and something to share with my team, I'm more than happy to do that.
Yes. Let's talk about what's going on in the next couple of weeks for you, or the month. What's ahead of you? Maybe you can just elaborate quickly, what's in the pipeline in the next couple of months.
So we're very excited. Q4 and Q1 2020 ahead of Redbiotec Q4. Actually, we are in Q4, but Q1 will be very attractive. Very attractive. Hopefully, for the development of our company, because we expect further data coming in, generating evidence that our bacteria work in various models. So we'll show in various animal models and in vitro assays, we will get further validation of our assets, showing efficacy on one hand, on the other hand also safety. And we believe with that package, hopefully we'll achieve all our goals. With this package, we will then be, I think, in a very attractive position for collaboration with pharma companies. And what would you say? I mean, I saw on your timeline also about funding. So I think Series A is coming soon. So maybe you can quickly elaborate where this money should bring you. I know there's the IND stage or phase 1 stage. So where exactly do you hope to be getting with this money? So we always work on what we call a dual track. Yes. So on one hand, we collaborate with pharma companies early on. There's no better validation than the one coming from pharma companies. Of course, we can show something in our own lab, but people will believe this data package probably less than the data package that is coming from a pharma company. Yes. And in parallel, we raise money. And it's now planned for Q2 2020 that we have a Series A round. So we raise up to 10 million. It's not exactly defined yet by the board of directors closing date, nor the money we raise, but it will be roughly around 10 million. Now with this money, we will basically bring our assets to IND filing. And that's a big milestone if you reach that milestone. In this period, that will be maybe 2 to 3 years. In this period, we will keep collaborating with pharma companies, and we believe out of this collaboration we can make further deals, be it licensing deals, be it M&A transactions.
So let's talk quickly. If we take a little bit out of a little bit of a more holistic approach of the biotech environment, maybe you can just give me a little bit of a news update. What is going on in the biotech world? What are the big topics that are currently being discussed that you are keeping a close eye on?
Wow, big question. I believe gene therapy. Yes. Not because Redbiotec is working in gene therapy field, but because I also believe that other companies are, or big pharma companies are investing heavily when it comes to the approved products in the market. Yes. You see very big M&A transactions. You see billion-dollar deals. But you see also in the research phase, lots of groups and companies trying to develop assets in the space of gene therapy. I believe that makes sense because there are so many diseases linked to genetic disorders you have actually already when being born, or you acquire over time of your lifespan. And both can lead to a situation that you need a therapy. Yes. And that's you solve the problem at its root. You don't just treat the symptoms. So I personally also believe that gene therapy could lead to help lots of patients on this planet. So that's one big thing. Then we see others. We see, for instance, bacteria. We also see companies considering live cells, cell therapy or bacteria-based therapy.
I mean, like one of the big things, and I mean, I was not never really involved, but I know from my wife is the Crispr. Is this something that is on your radar, or how much is it on your radar?
Oh, it's more than on our radar. It's actually it's in our hands. It's in our lab. We use it as part of our gene therapy. So one beauty of using our bacteria is they can carry a big payload, and the big payload allows Redbiotec's bacteria to carry CRISPR-Cas as a tool to be delivered into a cell. So we can actually, thanks to our bacteria, we can bring in CRISPR-Cas into a cell, and CRISPR-Cas will then into that cell actually correct a gene that is wrong.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what we do. And of course, we also use CRISPR-Cas as a research tool in our lab today.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem here. I mean, like, I'm really curious to know, how were you able and how difficult was it for you to find your early investors into the company?
That's another very good question, Cedric. It's some time ago. We got lists of pharma experts having a high affinity for new technologies, also young companies. There was no business angel club at that time with a scope on life sciences or biotechnology. So we contacted them, and there were also some institutional investors. So early stage VCs, we actually pitched all of them, and we ultimately got the money together from various sources. So our cap table started to grow.
Yes.
That was the beginning.
Now, one of the interesting parts, and I'm really curious to hear, I mean, like, Redalpine is one of the biggest players here in Switzerland, and you probably have a very special relationship, as kind of like you first had them as an investor, and then you became an LP of their fund. Maybe you can quickly elaborate how kind of like this relationship with Redalpine has been developing over the last years. Also keep in mind that, like, you know, this is really dedicated to people who want to kind of like see Redalpine on their cap table to really understand like what is expecting them once they really, let's say, were able to close a deal with them.
So you refer to the special relationship I possibly have, or we possibly have as a company with Redalpine, and that's true. I mean, I think Redbiotec was one of the first life science investment of Redalpine Capital 1. I hope I'm correct, but but that was 2008.
Yes.
So I think with the first fund, which was a smaller fund than the following funds of Redalpine Capital. So with the Redalpine Capital 1 fund, they invested into Redbiotec. That, having said that, I have some 11 years I've been working with Michael Siedler in the board of directors. And over such a long period, of course, you get closer and closer. And today, I'm very pleased to be one of the LPs of Redalpine. Unfortunately, not Capital 1, because that fund it was not accessible for me anymore, but Redalpine Capital 3. There I see my role, as I said previously, my role is to share my learnings with the young companies, the young portfolio companies in which Redalpine Capital 3 is invested in. I'm offering my help, my support, my network to all of those young companies.
But I want to just ask again, because I think it's really important. How did Redalpine help you in these stages of Redbiotec?
So at that stage, so when I invested 2008, they helped a lot, because that's one of the first bigger institutional investor investing into Redbiotec, and that is of course a game changer.
Yes.
Because it's one thing.
Stamp of like.
Yeah, it gives you a next level of credibility.
Yeah.
I think if you can refer to a professional investor. Not saying that the private individuals are not professional, but of course it's different whether you deal with private individuals or you deal with a company, a VC or an early stage investor as a company. So yeah, they gave us a boost, and I think with the investment of Redalpine, we could actually get access to further investments, and also because Redalpine then sending Michael to the board of directors, it gives you also some some challenge. You have to suddenly. We had to deliver before, but obviously then you have the board meetings. You have a different setting of the board. If you have a critical investor sending its representative to the board of directors, and you have to perform well.
Now let's talk a little bit about how you are supporting now the new generation. I mean, like you just said about with angel investments, where you actually invest with money, which I think it's very hard to deploy the money correctly. But I think what was even harder is how do you help them beyond the capital?
So first of all, I'm not investing in dozens of young companies. I think in the biotech field, I made so far 2 investments. And I try to be very critical, in particular in this very initial phase when I'm about to invest. So I'm not challenging those companies for the sake of protecting my investment. That's a nice side effect. But the main effect is that I really help with some stupid mistakes they could make, and I hope that with my help they can avoid those mistakes. So because I have over this time spent such a quite big experience, I can share that, and I'm doing that. So so very precisely, I'm talking to those companies, I'm meeting with those companies, and I'm telling them basically anything that I know in the field. And then in addition to that, I give them access to my own network. So if they seek for additional money, I'm more than willing to share my sources with them. That might be a little conflict of interest, because if we are in the fundraising mode as well, we want to keep the money for ourselves. Yes. However, they're normally in very different fields, disease areas, so there's no overlap in this respect.
I mean, I guess that's also what you do as a lecturer at the various universities and IFJ. I guess that is the key goal, to really educate the next generation, avoiding the biggest mistakes.
Yeah, that's true. So InnoSwiss, Venturelab, these programs, I've been part of the last nearly 20 years. That's my motivation. That's my motivation. To do that, and with lots of passion to share my learnings with those young entrepreneurs. And it's so nice to do this job. Cedric, it's so nice to do that, because you see the passion of these young entrepreneurs. They really want to be successful. They want to move ahead, these companies. And this is such a fruitful environment also for me. It's inspiring for me as well.
First is, what would you like to see in the next 5 years in the Swiss ecosystem?
I would like to see new funds to be coming up, new funds with new investors, maybe having additional or different strategies from today's investors, being complementary to today's early stage investors.
And young people. But then we had my profile.
and of course young companies who could then profit from those funds.
Yes.
So obviously, but I think on the companies front we have a good deal flow. I mean, you see lots of startup companies.
Yes. How are you making sure to be a good leader?
I work every day to meet one specific goal. I think it's very important to me. This is to stay humble. I'm by nature a very passionate person. That's at least everyone around me telling me. But what I have to work on is every day, I think, is to stay humble and to stay self-critical. And I think with the 2 pillars, being passionate and being humble, I hope to be a good leader.
How did you turn a failure into a learning experience?
I don't think I have to do that. I think a failure is automatically a learning.
What's important to you in an investor?
That the investor understands business and the business model, including the timelines, including the expected return on investment, and that the investor is committed to spend some time and make a proper due diligence.
Last but not least, what traits do you look for when you hire?
on the scientific track, I mean, they have to be great scientists. They really have to bring up something that is complementary to the team. I just don't want to have an additional scientist having exactly the same background as another scientist. I want to have something bringing in something new. That's why we invest in young people also. Then these people have to be compatible with this entrepreneurial setting. So they have actually, ideally, they have the mindset of an entrepreneur themselves. And they see Redbiotec as a beautiful environment to grow. Very honestly, I think just go out and take some risk. I personally believe life is far too short to be defensive and to always think problems, challenges, issues. You should rather look at it from the other side and see the beauty of the potential, see the upside, see the opportunity.
Very nice ending. To look at the opportunities, to look at the good side. And thank you very much, Christian, for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody who stayed all the way till the end of this video. Make sure you stay a few more seconds so you see who is up the upcoming Monday. Have a great week and hope to see you next week. I personally wanted to thank you for your attention, feedback, and support you have given me this past year. Thank you so much. Episode 187 is the last episode of 2019 and we'll be back in January 2020 with new shows for you to enjoy and learn from and maybe also to invest in. My name is Cedric Bollock and I am the CEO and founder of GlobalTechBox.com. In 2019, we have featured 45 highly interesting guests on our independent flagship video series, The Startup Show. Out of 45 guests, we had 33 CEOs and founders of the most promising startups from around the world, 7 investors who are actively investing in startups, and 5 people who are executives at global corporations. Please send me your feedback so we can make it even better. Meanwhile, happy holidays, Chanukah Sameach, and happy, healthy, and a successful New Year.